2020 has fundamentally changed the context in which South African municipalities govern and provide services. Future Cities Africa has partnered with South African Cities Network on a series of 4 episodes that look at how cities have fared during the pandemic and what fundamental lessons have been learned. We cover economic recovery, climate change, governance and municipal finance, and built environment. Nomfundo Dlamini is Program Manager for Productive Cities at South African Cities Network. Nomfundo, welcome. Give us a brief introduction on your role at South African Cities Network.
Thank you so much, Dan. So my work focuses on strengthening urban economies. I look at elements that pertain to job creation and economic infrastructure investment, that pertains to spatial transformation, expanding economic participation, and also on improving local economic governance for our cities.
Before we dive into economic recovery, let's reflect on the State of Cities report of 2016. Since then, what has changed for the better and what has changed for the worse?
The 2016 State of Cities report stated that the economy is important for the development and growth of our cities, and that this growth must be premised on effective spatial transformation. So with mounting job losses and the economic downturn affecting both the rich and the poor, attention is increasingly focused on the role that cities play in stimulating and supporting economic development. So what our evidence has shown is that cities have been driving economic growth, with them also generating almost 2/3 of the country's economic activity and just over half of national employment. And that cities have also significantly improved their service delivery and generally have good strategies in place to facilitate economic growth and social development. So this places our cities, both our primary and intermediary, at the epicenter and taking a leading role in South Africa's economic recovery and development. And thus the key messages that were in our 2016 State of Cities report were that firstly, cities have a critical role to play in driving South Africa's economy. Secondly, the good story of growth and development has unfortunately not included everyone. So the ITSOC advocated that spatial transformation is a key lever for productive city economies and inclusive city growth. It also stated that our cities should develop bold economic development strategies that include the informal sector and public employment programs, and that our cities need to expand economic activities and participation through innovation, skills development, and targeted investments. And then lastly, that our cities should learn from one another's strength in order to improve their current business climates.
So, how have our cities fared during 2020? Many are facing economic decline, crime and grime, and an overall demise as people and many employees move out of the cities considering the lockdown.
I think it must be understood that there is an important role to be played by cities in unleashing South Africa's economy to both foster inclusive economic growth and also to create an enabling environment for future economies to bud. But this is obviously extremely challenging in the light of all the recent developments. But I do want to note a very important aspect regarding to what has transpired from a macroeconomic scale to discuss the resilience of what actually constitutes our economy. And for me, that is our people. So the resilience of people has demonstrated that we are capable of carving a new normal for our society. So even in the midst of loss of life, the crisis has presented an opportunity for us to reboot, redirect, and reorganize ourselves, our communities, and our interests. So economic governance now means putting health and safety at the forefront before capital interests. Preserving life means preserving our environment too, and these are the matrices upon which we need to rebuild our cities and to ensure more inclusive, sustainable, and transformative economic growth.
Many corporates have taken their people out of the city, some even reporting to keep it that way until June 2021. What impact does that have on those that make a living from inner city business?
For me, I'd like to actually pose that actually the opposite is quite true. So yes, in lush corporate configurated areas such as your Sandtons, Umhlanga Ridge, the waterfront areas, some conglomerate firms have had to consider employees working from home or rotational shifts. But if you meander the inner city of Durban around the Victoria Market and Warwick Junction precincts, or small streets in Fordsburg and the Marshalltown Fashion District, the vibrant economies are actually well underway. So the notion that our inner city is reliant on corporate industry to survive is not entirely accurate. Yes, there is a symbiosis, But much of the inner city's agility and ability to remain afloat is reliant on organized elements of trade and stewardship, which are core characteristics of some of the most sophisticated networks established through our informal economies. And those have been adaptive and have been keeping a lot of families and incomes afloat.
Corporates and larger businesses are also reporting downscaling their operations. What impact will this have on our cities?
This is a phenomenon affecting the entire world. We cannot escape it, but it permits for us to reimagine what opportunities arise from innovation. So this is why I have to stress the importance of cities investing in economic infrastructure. So besides the importance of roads and rail, water and housing provision, the provision of internet connectivity, a stable electricity supply, and upgrades in our water and sanitation provision would mean that anyone, anywhere can conduct business because we would be fundamentally connected through technology. So elements such as agribusiness and urban farming can also be realized. Supporting our township economies to be part of the value chain of industries can also be made possible. So again, I'd just like to emphasize the fact that in the midst of crisis, an opportunity is presented. And thus we need to undertake an approach that embraces the changes and also buffers the strain to be able to begin being agile enough to absorb the shocks and actually assist our society and our economy to morph into a new normal.
Another global trend is that of remote working. What impact do you think that will have on our cities?
So our current employment by sector is actually constituted with 5% of our workers in agriculture, 23% in industry, and an overall 72% within services, and which is a rather large proportion of individuals are able to work remotely. But most are rotational, and so an element of normalcy is currently underway as individuals have had to adapt their working environments to be more contingent with safety protocols. This obviously changes the level of service delivery that we are used to, the level of human interaction, and also being able to acquire the right kinds of needs and bases and services. However, I think we have to, as I stressed before, strengthen our economic infrastructure to be able to make connectivity more viable. There is a new normal that is underway. We cannot escape it, but our systems have to keep up with the changes that are occurring in the current world order. Otherwise, we will continue to stress and strain an already strained institutional capacity that hasn't been viable before the onset of the current situation.
If people don't need to come to work, will that have an impact on our suburbs that are close to the city centers? And what is the economic impact of that?
A new normal has transpired. One of virtual meetings and hand sanitization is now the new order. But for many who still need to commute with public transportation to the city centers and suburbs, life has to continue and they have to make a means to an end. So the economic impact that was actually felt on our previous more constrained and constricted lockdown levels, that took a hard strain on a lot of families, a lot of small businesses, and especially on our tourism and hospitality industries. I think we are yet to adequately measure the actual impact in terms of what that resulted in. But I feel that the current level has allowed for those industries to open up and has allowed for individuals to regain a new sense of normalcy and start re-entering back into recovering their current economic status.
What are some of the key ingredients and key steps towards economic recovery?
So I've definitely thought this through, and I think part and parcel of our work has had to also kind of think about what is it that we need from a city level and also from a macroeconomic level and policy thinking level in order for us to constitute recovery of our macroeconomies and our urban economies. So the first thing that I'd want to advocate is that part and parcel of our economic recovery would need for us to change the current macroeconomic policy thinking, planning, and decision making. Because currently it is placed at the helm of national government. Yet we find that our economic interventions and the implementation actually transpires at a city level. So cities, unfortunately, are not economically empowered, and are excluded from championing macroeconomic thinking and decision-making to be able to influence policy planning and challenge the systemic way in which cities are financed in order for them to transform their current spatial form. So what we found is that our cities have been disempowered to have agency in their current urban economies and ineffectively steering themselves towards inclusive growth and sustainability. And that the critical role of cities in the national economy has unfortunately not yet been fully recognized and supported. And our cities require more than state funding to expand and maintain the provision of electricity, water, transportation, the telecommunications infrastructure, and the economic infrastructure that I spoke of in order for them to be able to support their sustainability. So I really feel that public sector investment will need to unleash the economic potential of infrastructure investment that makes economic potential of our cities to actually be realized. And this must be realized through equitable spatial transformation and an element of cooperative governance that actually also challenges the current strain that our intergovernmental relations system is currently under, because we don't have a lot of collaboration and we don't have a lot of cooperation between the various spheres, and especially pertaining to our sector regulations. These still need to stimulate our market competition and also promote for affordable access to quality services. It still baffles me how it is that data in South Africa is the most expensive resource, yet we expected to remain in an institution or in an organization that is led by 4IR, and yet we are still disenabling individuals to be able to have this element or have access to this element of economic infrastructure. So from a policy perspective, like I've been saying, I think our cities will need to be awarded the policy and regulatory autonomy to diversify their urban economies and to also be able to enable and foster innovation.
With regards to smaller towns and smaller cities, how can they rejuvenate themselves to be more productive cities on the kind of same level that bigger cities are?
I think the niche is not for the smaller towns or the intermediary cities to aspire to be primary cities, but to aspire to be the best version of themselves. I think what is essential here is firstly for us to develop concrete good governance structures and to also be able to build the internal capacity to be able to drive the macroeconomic reform of the local government state. And this is inclusive of all elements of our cities, from our towns to our intermediate cities, as well as to our primary cities. And this in and of itself will be able to establish a resounding economic agency of all our municipalities. If we're able to establish that particular space economy, which is quite hybrid, it has to have connections, it has to be strengthened in its complexities and also be perplexed, then we'll be able to derive the locational value proposition of our particular towns and intermediary cities, and then also be able to unlock what type of opportunities that will be able to transform the current city's urban form and economic capacity. And so I feel that spatial differences in our economic resources and the capabilities that are affecting our various city regions need to be capacitated to be more resilient and diverse in order for them to be able to have equitable growth. And so, unfortunately, the fundamental spatial inequalities are still quite inherent in our economic landscape. And this also kind of characterizes our unique characteristics pertaining to the different and distinct industrial mixes, workforce skills and infrastructure and governance elements that we find in the various categories of our cities. And so we have to have fostered and concerted effort that is able to sustain job creation, advocate for new economies and vibrancy, and also be able to mold our current institutions to be more adaptable, to assist in decision-making processes to be more streamlined, to ensure that there is cooperation, and more than anything, for economic governance and financial management to be adhered to in ways upon which that there is accountability and we are able to see transformation transpire at a local level.
Do you think over the next 5 years, our cities will be economically more inclusive or less inclusive?
We've had to meander very tough economic times. And unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, our cities have actually become the sites for economic agency, for resilience and innovation. Because whether we like it or not, elements that seem less sophisticated, such as our informal economies, have had individuals take on an element of economic agency and resilience and innovation that has not been planned for, that can also at times not be controlled, but has yielded to the sustainability and the sustenance of millions of South Africans, the countrywide over. So I would have to say that because of the nature of our people, who I've kept emphasizing are the most resilient and the most agile in their way upon which that they're not waiting for handouts, but they're trying to make a means to an end. Our cities are probably the most transformed. What we now need to merge is an element upon which we embrace this element of informality. And when I say informality, in no way do I mean, and I don't want individuals to ever think that the informal economy is not organized, is not complex, is not sophisticated, because those are some of the most sophisticated networks that far outbid some of the more corporate and conglomerates that we are so used to. And so I feel that transformation has transpired. It's inclusion that needs to transpire in the same length and breadth. So there still, unfortunately, are tensions between formal business and informal, and unfortunately also in our rules and regulations, especially when it pertains to our cities, planning, and the spaces and how it is that we foster for this hybridization to transpire. And I feel that that is what we need to foster more. Because unfortunately, what has been intrinsic in South Africa is that we have allocated areas according to your economic muscle. And this has not allowed for us to embrace the vibrancy and the agency that is of a robust economy that is transpiring. And so whether we are looking at housing provision, for example, we need to have more inclusionary housing across the board. Otherwise, we will still be separating the haves from the have-nots. And so I think this has to be a high policy imperative, not just for our city governments, but also for our national and provincial, to ensure that we are fostering and ensuring that inclusion transpires across the board, whether it is from an economic perspective, like I'd spoken, from our informal economies, our township economies, to ensure that there's agency there, to how it is that we are ensuring that our children and the level of education is also inclusive in terms of a hybridization of individuals coming from different areas. Also to the element of job creation and where it is that we place our firms. We need to look at, for example, our spatial planning form and to say, why is it that we cannot rezone areas that are closer to the areas the majority of our population live, still in our township and informal community areas, to have industry place itself there because there is a pool of labor. We really need to be more innovative in terms of what it is that we can change within our policy prescripts to enable for more inclusion to transpire. And so transformation in the next 5 years must occur, and unfortunately is occurring with or without the policy imperatives. But we just need to be able to all embrace it.
What are the main lessons taken from 2020 and how can we address them to not only survive, but to thrive into the new year?
The fundamental lesson for me with 2020 is just how important it is for us to focus on the human element instead of the capitalistic element in terms of what it is that constitutes our economies and the agency that us as a nation have also had to face and also undergo and also aspire to be better. I think first and foremost, our cities during these tough economic times, like I'd mentioned before, have become the sites of economic agency and resilience and innovation. What we propose is that our cities need to do more in terms of securing the livelihoods, especially of our more indigent and poor people. And this needs to be advocated through these innovations that need to take form in a way upon which that we advocate for more inclusive economic development. So the first and foremost element that I would advocate for is that our cities need to scale up on public employment programs. And these in and of themselves also support the development of city regions, of our informal economies, as well as advocating for more sustainable township economic development. We see this through how it is that our public employment programs have fundamentally been championed through national government, through the National Department of Public Works, through the Extended Public Works Program, but it needs an all-of-society approach. Industries also need to partner, and so we advocate for more private-public partnerships in sustainable public employment programs so that we can see more of our human capital or human resources being strengthened or given the element of empowerment to also have their skills developed, and their skills developed into industries that are currently constituting our economy and contributing to our growth. And that for me would be one of the main derivatives that I'd say that we need to focus on, because this also allows for more sustained and systemic inclusion through elements that would be linking our governance linkages together with our private sector. And unfortunately, especially pertaining to our intergovernmental relations framework, there's been very little evidence of that transpiring, either from a sector perspective and then also pertaining to the government sphere as a whole. I also feel that one of the things that we need to also advocate from an IGR perspective is to foster more peer-to-peer learning. Our cities are never pulled into a room together to discuss what are the challenges that one is facing and how it is that we can mitigate those challenges, and to also be encouraged to learn from each other. So our current intergovernmental relations framework has yielded very little evidence in terms of that peer-to-peer learning and best practice, outside, unfortunately, of cities being hauled into portfolio committee meetings or city budget forums in order for them to actually just report on compliance and expenditure. So we also need to foster that element of conversation, whereupon which one city's strength can enable another city's demise in a particular area. And this in and of itself will be able to assist cities to work beyond their demarcated boundaries, because those in and of themselves are very limiting. And one of the things that I would really hope that South Africa can foster in the future, in the near future going forward, is for us to start thinking from a more regional perspective. So let's consider our coastal cities as a coastal region. How is it that we can ensure connectivity, to ensure that our ports are expanded so that we're able to also compete with other cities and other regions in the world that have that expanse, and so that we're not limited to the municipal demarcations and the municipal boundaries? How is it that we can plan for our cities in a way upon which that we start looking at our sub-regional development? So, for example, SADC, what is it that we can offer as a SADC region in compared to South Africa competing with Mozambique or competing with your Namibia? How is it that we can strengthen connectivity and especially economic connectivity, so that we are able to also compete on the world scale? Because unfortunately, the time has long left us for us to be competing amidst each other to acquire capital investment and economic infrastructure, but rather for us to buddy up and to cooperate and to collaborate, so that we are much more stronger and we are also given the right kind of economic capabilities to be able to acquire more and do more.